My own father dragged me into court to declare me mentally incompetent and steal my inheritance. He thought I was just a quiet, fragile disappointment, so I let him commit perjury before springing a trap that ruined his life forever. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The persistent, rhythmic beeping of the humidifier was the only sound in my apartment, a sharp contrast to the absolute chaos that was currently unfolding inside my head. I was 32 years old, yet sitting on my sofa wrapped in a heavy fleece blanket, I felt as frail and helpless as an infant. The severe bout of pneumonia had ravaged my lungs over the past 3 weeks, leaving me tethered to an oxygen concentrator and a strict regimen of antibiotics. Every breath I took felt like I was inhaling crushed glass, a jagged reminder of my own physical vulnerability. My usually sharp mind was clouded with a lingering, feverish fog, making it difficult to process the harsh glare of the afternoon sun filtering through the blinds, let alone the devastating contents of the thick manila envelope resting ominously on my lap. The courier had dropped it off just 20 minutes earlier. It was a dense, heavy packet of legal documents, bound by a severe blue backing paper that screamed of official, life-altering business. My hands, still trembling slightly from the physical exertion of walking to the front door, had fumbled with the clasp. Now, the documents were spread out across my knees, the stark black ink blurring against the white paper as tears of sheer, unadulterated disbelief pooled in my eyes. At the top of the very first page, stamped with the imposing seal of the county probate court, were the words, "Petition for appointment of probate conservator." Below that, the petitioner was listed, Arthur Mitchell. My father, the respondent, Sophia Mitchell. Me. I blinked hard, forcing the tears to fall so my vision could clear, hoping against hope that I had misread the cold, legal terminology. But the words remained stubbornly, cruelly unchanged. I read through the summary, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The petition claimed, in clinical, detached language, that I was gravely disabled and unable to properly provide for her personal needs for physical health, food, clothing, or shelter. It went further, stating with brazen audacity that I suffered from severe and debilitating mental incompetence and was entirely susceptible to undue influence and fraud. Because of these alleged deficiencies, the document demanded that Arthur Mitchell be granted immediate, absolute control over my estate, my financial assets, my living arrangements, and my medical decisions. He was asking the court to strip me of my autonomy, to legally reduce me to the status of a dependent child, all while I was isolated and fighting to simply breathe in my own home. My mind raced, desperately trying to construct a logical explanation where none existed. Was this a terrible mistake? A clerical error of catastrophic proportions? My father was the CEO of Mitchell Holdings, a man of intense focus and relentless ambition, but he was still my father. He was the man who had taught me how to ride a bicycle, the man who had held my hand at my mother's funeral 10 years ago. We weren't incredibly close. We had drifted into a quiet, mutually respectful distance over the years, characterized by brief holiday dinners and perfunctory birthday text messages. But to do this, to legally ambush me while I was bedridden, I picked up the accompanying medical declaration. It was signed by a doctor I had never heard of, let alone met, citing reports from concerned family members about my erratic behavior and declining cognitive function. The audacity of the lies made my stomach churn with sudden, violent nausea. They were painting my quiet, solitary lifestyle and my current, temporary physical illness as evidence of a permanent, catastrophic mental breakdown. They were weaponizing my privacy and my illness against me. A deep, bone-chilling cold began to spread from my chest outward, freezing the blood in my veins. This wasn't a mistake. This was a calculated, predatory strike. This was an assassination of my character and my freedom, orchestrated by the one person in the world who was supposed to protect me unconditionally. The oxygen tube beneath my nose hissed, providing air to my recovering lungs, but I had never felt more suffocated. The illness in my lungs was absolutely nothing compared to the sudden, suffocating realization that the man who gave me life was actively trying to erase it. The silence in my apartment stretched on, thick and oppressive, broken only by my shallow, rattling breaths. I stared at the legal documents until the letters lost all meaning, transforming into a senseless jumble of black lines. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal threatened to pull me under a wave of debilitating panic. I needed to hear his voice. I needed to hear him try to justify this monstrous act, or perhaps, in some desperate, naive corner of my heart, I hoped he would tell me he had been hacked, that this was all an elaborate, cruel prank. My fingers felt numb as I reached for my cell phone resting on the coffee table. I pulled up Arthur's contact, saved simply as Dad, and pressed the green icon. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Each ring felt like a physical blow, a ticking clock counting down the final seconds of the relationship I thought we had. Finally, the line clicked open. "Sophia," his voice came through the speaker. It wasn't the worried tone of a father checking on his sick daughter. It was smooth, flat, and remarkably composed. It was the tone he used during board meetings when he was about to lay off a division. "I assume you've received the package." His immediate acknowledgement hit me like a bucket of ice water. There was no confusion, no surprise, only cold, calculated anticipation. "Dad," I managed to choke out, my voice raspy and weak from the pneumonia. What is this? A conservatorship, mentally incompetent." "Now, Sophia, let's not get hysterical," Arthur said, the condescension dripping from his words like venom. "Your voice alone tells me how fragile you are right now. You're sick. You've been isolating yourself. You aren't thinking clearly." "I have pneumonia, Dad," I countered, trying to inject some strength into my trembling voice. "It's an infection in my lungs, not my brain." "I don't need you to take over my entire life." "You need help, sweetheart," he continued, completely ignoring my logic, smoothly adopting a tone of faux paternal concern that made my skin crawl. "You've been living like a hermit. You have no real career to speak of, you just sit in that apartment day in and day out. It's not healthy. You're vulnerable. I'm doing this for your own good, to protect your assets before you do something foolish." In the background of the call, I heard the faint clinking of a glass, followed by a soft, distinctly feminine murmur. My breath hitched. It was Vanessa. "I am perfectly capable of managing my own life," I said, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "You have no right to do this. I will fight this in court." Arthur let out a soft, dismissive chuckle that sent a shiver down my spine. It was a sound entirely devoid of warmth or empathy. "With what energy, Sophia? You can barely string a sentence together without coughing. Let the adults handle this. In fact, Vanessa will be coming by the family estate later this week to start organizing things and taking inventory. We want to make sure your mother's heirlooms are properly secured while you recover." The implication hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. They weren't just coming for my autonomy, they were coming for the family estate, the trust, the physical memories of my mother. They were preparing to strip my life down to the studs and sell off the copper wiring. "Don't you dare send her to the house," I whispered, the anger finally burning through the feverish haze. "Don't you dare." "Rest up, Sophia. The lawyers will handle the rest," Arthur replied smoothly, and then without another word, the line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. The conversation had been a master class in gaslighting. He had taken my quiet nature, my preference for a private, solitary life, and twisted it into a narrative of profound mental instability. He thought I was weak. He thought I was just the silent, unremarkable daughter who spent her days reading and avoiding the limelight of his corporate world. He saw me as an easy target, a minor obstacle to be swatted away with a few legal maneuvers. I looked down at the documents again, the panic slowly receding, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. They thought they had backed a helpless rabbit into a corner, but they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had no idea who I actually was or what I did in the silence of my apartment when nobody was watching. The audacity of Arthur's claim that I had no real career to speak of. was a bitter pill to swallow, largely because it was a lie of my own careful design. For the past decade, I had actively cultivated the image of a soft-spoken, unambitious woman living comfortably, if quietly, off a modest trust fund. I had allowed my father to believe I was fragile, largely because it kept him at a comfortable distance and allowed me to protect him in ways he would never understand or appreciate. When my mother passed away 10 years ago, Mitchell Holdings had been entirely unstable. My mother had been the quiet strategic mind behind the company, and her sudden absence sent Arthur into a tailspin of poor decisions and reckless investments. I was only 22 at the time, fresh out of university, but I had immediately stepped into the shadows to patch the holes in a sinking ship. I sacrificed the normal, carefree 20s that my peers enjoyed. While they were traveling and building their public resumes, I was staying up until 4:00 a.m., anonymously reviewing balance sheets, restructuring corporate debt through third-party intermediaries, and quietly ensuring the company remained solvent without bruising Arthur's notoriously fragile ego. I let him take all the credit for the miraculous financial turnaround. My devotion to him, honoring my mother's legacy, had been absolute. And this brutal, public attempt to declare me legally incompetent was how he repaid a decade of silent, unwavering loyalty. But this sudden cruelty didn't originate from Arthur alone. My father was arrogant and selfish, yes, but he was also fundamentally lazy. Orchestrating a fraudulent conservatorship required a level of meticulous, proactive malice that wasn't his style. No, the architect of this nightmare was undeniably Vanessa Pierce. Arthur had introduced Vanessa to the family, which consisted solely of me, just 6 months ago during an agonizingly tense dinner at an upscale steakhouse. She was 35, impeccably groomed, and moved with the predatory grace of someone who was constantly calculating the exact value of everything in the room. She wore a designer dress that cost more than my car and sported a smile that never quite reached her cold, calculating eyes. Vanessa is a premier business consultant, Arthur had announced that night, beaming at her with an infatuation that was honestly embarrassing for a man of 64. She's been helping me streamline operations at Mitchell Holdings, a brilliant mind. I remember politely asking Vanessa about her consulting background, inquiring about her previous firm or her area of specialization. She had deflected instantly, waving a manicured hand and speaking in a dizzying circle of empty corporate buzzwords. Oh, synergy alignment, optimizing cross-platform deliverables, restructuring vertical paradigms. She had purred smoothly, sipping her expensive wine. It was absolute nonsense. It was the language of someone who had learned how to sound important without possessing any actual expertise. But what truly raised the hair on my arms that night, and during every brief interaction since, was her intense, almost obsessive interest in my life. She didn't ask about my hobbies or my friends. Instead, her questions were always thinly veiled interrogations about my assets. Sophia, that estate your mother left you in the Hamptons, isn't it terribly difficult to maintain for one person? Or, I imagine the tax burden on a family trust of that size must be incredibly complex. How do you ever manage it? At the time, I had merely brushed off her invasive questions, giving vague, non-committal answers to protect my privacy. I had recognized her immediately for what she was, a highly motivated gold digger who saw my father as a lucrative retirement plan. I had assumed she would simply marry him, drain his personal accounts over a few years, and move on. I hadn't realized her ambition was far more monstrous. Vanessa didn't just want a piece of Arthur's pie, she wanted the entire bakery. She had looked at the Mitchell family wealth, realized that I, the sole heir, was standing between her and absolute control, and decided to legally eradicate me. She had whispered in his ear, fed his ego, and convinced him that his quiet, private daughter was actually a threat to herself, paving the way for them to seize everything I owned. I leaned my head back against the sofa, my breathing finally steadying. The betrayal burned like acid in my chest, but the sorrow was quickly evaporating, replaced by something much colder and far more dangerous. Vanessa Pierce thought she had manipulated a foolish old man into easily outsmarting a helpless, pathetic spinster. She was about to find out exactly how wrong she was. I sat on the sofa for another 10 minutes, allowing the final remnants of my shock to evaporate into the sterile air of my apartment. Then, slowly, deliberately, I reached up and pulled the oxygen cannula from my nose. I took a deep, unassisted breath. My lungs still burned, a dull ache radiating through my chest, but I was no longer gasping. I was no longer the helpless victim they desperately needed me to be. I pushed the heavy fleece blanket off my lap, letting the petition for conservatorship slide unceremoniously onto the hardwood floor. I stood up. My legs felt a bit unsteady, but my mind was sharper than it had been in weeks. I walked past my modest kitchen, past the simple decor that Arthur so eagerly deemed hermit-like, and made my way to the second bedroom at the back of the apartment. To anyone else, the heavy steel door and the biometric keypad lock would have seemed intensely out of place in a residential building. I pressed my thumb against the scanner. A soft chime sounded, the deadbolts retracted with a heavy thud, and I pushed the door open. The room inside was a stark contrast to the rest of the apartment. It was kept at a cool 65 degrees to accommodate the humming tower of encrypted servers in the corner. An ergonomic chair sat in front of a massive, curved mahogany desk that held three 32-inch high-resolution monitors. This was my true domain. Arthur loved to boast to his country club friends that I had no real career. He genuinely believed my income trickled from my mother's trust fund. He had absolutely no idea that I was a senior forensic investigator for one of the most elite corporate intelligence firms in the country. More importantly, he had no idea that 3 months ago, the board of directors at Mitchell Holdings, growing deeply suspicious of glaring financial irregularities and Arthur's increasingly erratic decision-making, had bypassed my father entirely and hired my firm to conduct a shadow audit. Because of my intimate knowledge of the company's architecture, I was assigned as the lead investigator. For 12 weeks, I had been swimming through the digital arteries of Mitchell Holdings, tracking missing funds, phantom vendors, and manipulated ledgers. But the board's audit wasn't my only secret. Several years ago, recognizing Arthur's reckless habit of over-leveraging his personal shares to fund his lavish lifestyle, I had quietly established an anonymous LLC called Apex Capital Ventures. Through a series of blind trusts and proxy buyers, Apex Capital had systematically purchased all of Arthur Mitchell's outstanding corporate debt. He didn't just owe the bank, he owed me. I owned the paper on his life. I sank into my chair and woke up the monitors, the glow illuminating my face. The conservatorship was no longer just a familial betrayal. It was a desperate, sloppy attempt to silence me before I could uncover whatever massive fraud they were hiding. They needed my assets to plug a hole, and they needed me institutionalized to ensure I couldn't stop them. I pulled my keyboard closer. "All right, Vanessa," I whispered to the empty room, my fingers hovering over the keys. "Let's see what kind of consultant you really are." I bypassed the standard public search engines and logged directly into my firm's proprietary databases, linking into restricted financial registries and interstate litigation records. I started with her name, Vanessa Pierce, cross-referencing it with the shell vendors I had already flagged in the Mitchell Holdings audit. Within 20 minutes, the pristine, polished facade of the premier business consultant began to crack, revealing the rotting foundation beneath. The sudden, aggressive buzzing of my apartment intercom shattered my concentration. I checked the security camera feed on my third monitor. My stomach tightened. Standing in the lobby, looking thoroughly impatient, was Arthur. And right beside him, wearing a tailored cream blazer and clutching a designer clipboard, was Vanessa. They hadn't waited for the end of the week. They were here to start the inventory now. I quickly locked my workstation, stepped out of the office, and secured the biometric door. I retrieved my oxygen cannula, slipping it back over my ears and adjusting the tube under my nose, letting my posture slump just enough to project the illness I was still actively fighting. I pressed the buzzer to let them up, then unlocked my front door and retreated to the sofa, pulling the fleece blanket back over my knees. The door swung open without a knock. "Sophia, we're letting ourselves in," Arthur's voice boomed, completely devoid of any paternal warmth. He strode into the living room, his eyes scanning the space with absolute disdain. Vanessa followed close behind, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood. She didn't look at me, she looked at the apartment. Her eyes darted from the antique grandfather clock in the corner to the original oil paintings my mother had collected, a hungry, calculating gleam in her gaze. "Dad," I said, my voice intentionally raspy, "you shouldn't be here. I didn't invite you." "We are well past the point of invitations, Sophia," Arthur sighed, looking down at me as if I were a stain on the rug. "The court date for the emergency conservatorship is set for Friday. Vanessa is here to do a preliminary walkthrough for the estate appraisers. It's best we get a head start." "Oh, sweetheart," Vanessa cooed, finally turning her attention to me. She stepped closer, her perfume cloying and suffocating in the small space. She offered a smile that was entirely sharp edges. "You look absolutely dreadful. Don't you worry about a thing. Your father and I are going to take over all these stressful burdens for you. You just focus on resting." She reached out, her manicured fingers brushing the top of my mother's antique side table. "We'll probably start by cataloging the silver and the art. The house in the Hamptons will need a full inspection, of course." I looked directly into Vanessa's eyes, dropping the facade of the terrified, confused daughter. I kept my voice weak, but my tone was utterly composed. "I don't think you'll have time for the Hamptons, Vanessa," I said slowly. "Not with the current backlog at Blue Horizon Consulting." The temperature in the room seemed to plummet instantly. Vanessa's hand froze on the side table. Her perfectly painted lips parted slightly, and the faux sympathetic smile vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine, unadulterated panic. "What did you say?" Arthur frowned, looking between the two of us. "Blue Horizon, what's that?" "Just a little boutique firm," I replied, my eyes locked on Vanessa. "The one that billed Mitchell Holdings over $400,000 last quarter for synergy optimization. Funny thing, though. The business address for Blue Horizon is a P.O. box in Delaware, and the registered agent just happens to share Vanessa's exact date of birth." Vanessa's face contorted into an ugly, furious sneer. The elegant consultant vanished, revealing the street-level grifter beneath. "You shut your mouth, you pathetic little sick girl," she hissed, taking a threatening step toward me. "You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. You're hallucinating from your medication." She turned to Arthur, her voice instantly shifting back to a pleading, desperate pitch. "Arthur, do you see this? Do you hear her? She's completely lost her grip on reality. We need to expedite the court order, maybe look into a residential facility immediately. She's a danger to herself." "You're right, Vanessa," Arthur said, shaking his head at me in disgust. "Sophia, this paranoia is exactly why I had to intervene. Blue Horizon is a highly respected vendor. You're making things up to deflect from your own mental collapse." "Get out of my apartment," I said, pointing a trembling finger toward the door, ensuring I looked like I was losing the argument. "Both of you, get out." "We're leaving," Arthur snapped, "but we will see you in court on Friday. And God help you, Sophia, because you are entirely out of your depth." The moment the front door clicked shut, I discarded the oxygen tube once more and hurried back to my secure office. The confrontation had confirmed everything. Vanessa's visceral reaction to the name of her shell company told me she was terrified, and Arthur's blind defense of her told me he was completely, hopelessly compromised. I only had 2 days until the conservatorship hearing on Friday. 2 days to ensure they walked right into a trap they couldn't escape. I threw myself back into the investigation, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Blue Horizon was just the tip of the iceberg. Following the digital trail of the embezzled Mitchell Holdings funds, I uncovered a web of fraudulent invoices and dummy corporations. But I needed more than just corporate theft to destroy Vanessa's credibility in a probate court. I needed to prove a pattern of predatory behavior. I expanded the search parameters, running facial recognition on Vanessa's social media photos against national law enforcement databases and civil court filings. An hour later, the system pinged. Vanessa Pierce wasn't her real name. It was Valerie Potts. The documents began flooding my screen, a horrifying mosaic of manipulation and ruin. 7 years ago in Florida, Valerie Potts had befriended a 70-year-old retired real estate developer. She convinced him to grant her power of attorney, claiming he was suffering from early-onset dementia. By the time his actual children found out, she had liquidated his retirement accounts and vanished. 3 years ago in Arizona, she executed the exact same playbook on a widowed tech executive, resulting in a massive civil judgment against her that she had dodged by changing her name and moving across the country. She was a professional parasite, and my father was her latest host. My cell phone vibrated violently against the mahogany desk. It was Arthur. I answered on speakerphone, my eyes never leaving the damning court documents from Arizona. "Sophia," Arthur barked, not bothering with a greeting. "Vanessa is extremely distressed. Your delusional accusations have caused a severe rift. I am calling to tell you that our lawyers are filing an addendum to the petition right now. We are requesting that your communication privileges be restricted once the conservatorship is granted. You will not be allowed to harass my fiancé." "Dad, listen to me," I said, dropping the raspy voice entirely. My tone was sharp, commanding, echoing the authority of my actual profession. "You need to walk away from her right now. She is stealing from the company, and she is using you to steal from me." "Enough," Arthur roared, the sound distorting the phone's small speaker. "I will not listen to the paranoid ramblings of a sick woman. You are incompetent, Sophia. You are broken. Vanessa is the best thing that ever happened to me, and you are trying to ruin it because you are jealous and alone." "Check your email, Arthur," I said coldly. "I am not playing your games." "Check your email right now," I commanded, my voice echoing loudly in the small, secure room. There was a tense silence on the line, followed by the faint clicking of a mouse. I had just sent him a single, redacted PDF. It was the cover page of the Arizona civil judgment, clearly showing the photograph of Valerie Potts alongside the devastating ruling of elder fraud. What is this?" Arthur's voice faltered, the unyielding arrogance suddenly replaced by a tremor of confusion. "This is a fake. You photoshopped her face onto this. You are insane, Sophia." In the background of the call, I heard Vanessa's voice, shrill and panicked. "Arthur, what did she send you? Don't look at it, Arthur. She's trying to manipulate you." "I'll see you in court on Friday, Dad," I said quietly, the finality of the statement hanging heavy in the air. "Bring your attorney. And make sure Vanessa is there, too. I wouldn't want her to miss the conclusion of her little project." I ended the call. The board's audit was officially complete. The evidence of Vanessa's past was secured, and Apex Capital Ventures was prepared to call in Arthur's debts. They wanted to drag me into a courtroom and put my entire life on the public record. They were about to get exactly what they asked for. The heavy oak doors of the county courthouse swung open on Friday morning with a solemn, resonant thud. I walked through them not as the frail, bedridden daughter they expected, but as the senior forensic investigator I truly was. My pneumonia had finally broken, leaving me tired but breathing freely. I wore a tailored charcoal pantsuit, my hair pulled back into a severe, professional clasp, and I carried a thick, leather-bound briefcase. Inside the courtroom, the air was stale and tense. Arthur and Vanessa were already seated at the petitioner's table. Vanessa looked absolutely triumphant. She wore a perfectly pressed navy blue dress, her posture rigidly upright, radiating the false confidence of a predator about to close a trap. Arthur sat beside her, his jaw set, refusing to even look in my direction as I took my seat at the opposing table. They had hired one of the most aggressive, high-priced probate attorneys in the city, a man named Mr. Sterling, who was currently organizing his notes with arrogant, practiced flicks of his wrist. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Henry Caldwell," the bailiff announced. Judge Caldwell, a stern man with decades of experience etched into his features, took his seat at the bench. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the docket. "We are here today for an emergency petition regarding the conservatorship of Sophia Mitchell. Mr. Sterling, you represent the petitioner, Arthur Mitchell." "I do, Your Honor," Sterling said, standing up smoothly. "We are asking for immediate intervention. The respondent, Miss Mitchell, is suffering from a severe psychological breakdown. She has isolated herself entirely, she is unable to manage her daily affairs, and she is currently experiencing aggressive paranoid delusions. She is a danger to herself and her substantial assets." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded neatly on the table. I did not interrupt. I let him build his house of cards as high as he possibly could. "She has repeatedly attacked my client's fiancé with baseless, psychotic accusations," Sterling continued, his voice rising in theatrical concern. "She is projecting her own financial incompetence onto those trying to help her. My client simply wishes to protect his daughter." Arthur, unable to contain his righteous indignation, suddenly stood up, leaning over the table. "She is completely out of her mind, Your Honor," he barked, his voice echoing loudly off the wood-paneled walls. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at me. "She needs to be locked away for her own good. She is mentally incompetent." The courtroom fell into a heavy, stunned silence at the outburst. Judge Caldwell banged his gavel once, shooting Arthur a dark look. "Mr. Mitchell, restrain yourself or you will be removed." The judge then turned his gaze to me. "Miss Mitchell, you have elected to represent yourself today. What is your response to these serious allegations?" I stayed completely silent for a long, agonizing moment. I looked at Arthur, watching his chest heave with anger, and then I looked at Vanessa, whose smug smile was securely fastened to her face. I slowly unclasped my leather briefcase. "Your Honor," I said calmly, my voice steady and clear, projecting easily across the room. "I do not suffer from delusions. I suffer from a profound disappointment in my father's judgment." I pulled out a dense, 300-page bound report, heavily stamped with the seal of my corporate intelligence firm, and handed it to the bailiff, who carried it up to the bench. "I am perfectly capable of managing my own assets," I continued, "and more importantly, I am apparently the only person capable of managing Mitchell Holdings. Included in that file, Your Honor, are my professional credentials, as well as the preliminary findings of an independent forensic audit commissioned by the Board of Directors of Mitchell Holdings. An audit that I personally led." Mr. Sterling scoffed loudly. "Your Honor, this is exactly the delusion we are talking about. She thinks she's a corporate auditor. She hasn't worked a day in her life." Judge Caldwell opened the file. He read the first page. Then he read the second. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the rustle of the heavy paper. The stern lines on the judge's face deepened into a look of absolute bewilderment. He looked up, his eyes darting between the official documents and Arthur's attorney. The judge leaned forward, staring directly at Mr. Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," he asked, his voice deadly quiet, "you really don't know who she is?" Mr. Sterling froze, his hand hovering over his notepad. The arrogant smirk vanished from his face. "Excuse me, Your Honor. Your client just testified in open court that his daughter has no career and no financial literacy," Judge Caldwell said, holding up the embossed certification page. "Yet I am holding the credentials of a senior forensic investigator who has just submitted a highly detailed, devastating audit of Mitchell Holdings. Furthermore, I am looking at certified financial documents proving that Miss Mitchell, operating under Apex Capital Ventures, personally owns over 80% of your client's outstanding corporate debt." Arthur's face went completely, horrifyingly pale. The blood drained from his cheeks so fast he looked as though he might faint. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "Wait, what?" he choked out, staring at me in absolute terror. "Apex, you are Apex Capital." "Yes, Dad," I said, finally turning to face him fully. "I bought your debt to stop you from bankrupting the company Mom built. But let's talk about the real reason we are here." I turned my gaze to Vanessa, who had suddenly shrunk back into her chair, her perfectly painted lips trembling. "The woman sitting next to you, Arthur, the woman who convinced you I was mentally incompetent, is currently funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars out of Mitchell Holdings into a shell corporation called Blue Horizon Consulting," I stated clearly for the court record. "But her name isn't Vanessa Pierce." I pulled a second folder from my briefcase and handed it to the bailiff. "Your Honor, these are certified civil judgments and police reports from Florida and Arizona. The woman sitting at the petitioner's table is Valerie Potts. She is a career con artist who specifically targets elderly, wealthy men, isolates them from their families, and drains their assets. She orchestrated this conservatorship to legally remove me, the only person standing between her and the Mitchell Family Trust." "That's a lie," Vanessa shrieked, jumping to her feet, her composure completely shattered. She pointed frantically at me, her face flushed with desperate rage. "She's faking those documents. Arthur, do something. Tell them she's crazy." But Arthur didn't move to defend her. He stood frozen, staring at the thick stack of evidence the judge was now reviewing. The veil of manipulation had finally, brutally been ripped away. He looked at Vanessa, truly seeing the feral, panicked grifter beneath the designer clothes for the first time. "You," Arthur whispered, his voice cracking with a mixture of betrayal and profound realization. "You told me she was sick. You told me this was the only way to save her." "She was in my way." Vanessa screamed, completely losing control, stepping away from the table as if preparing to bolt from the room. "You stupid, pathetic old man. You practically handed me the keys to the vault." Judge Caldwell slammed his gavel down with explosive force. "Order in this court. Bailiff, detain Miss Potts immediately. Mr. Sterling, I strongly suggest you advise your client on his vulnerability to federal perjury and corporate fraud charges." The judge looked down at me, a rare expression of deep respect crossing his face. "Miss Mitchell, this petition for conservatorship is dismissed with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, I am forwarding this entire evidentiary file directly to the district attorney's office." The aftermath of the hearing was swift and merciless. 2 courtroom bailiffs intercepted Vanessa before she could even reach the heavy oak doors, physically escorting her out of the room to await the local authorities. Her designer heels scraped against the marble floor, her shrill protests echoing down the hallway until they were finally silenced by the closing of a holding cell door. I walked out of the courtroom slowly, the heavy weight of the past decade lifting from my shoulders with every step. I found Arthur sitting on a wooden bench in the corridor. He looked like a hollowed-out shell of the arrogant CEO who had stormed into my apartment just days earlier. He was hunched over, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. I stood in front of him, clutching my briefcase. I didn't feel the urge to gloat or to scream. I only felt a deep, exhausted pity. He slowly looked up at me, his eyes red and brimming with tears. "Sophia," he whispered, his voice utterly broken. "My God. Sophia, what have I done? I was so blind. She made me feel important. She made me feel like I was still the man in charge. I almost destroyed you." "You didn't almost destroy me, Dad," I said quietly, taking a seat on the bench beside him, though leaving a deliberate space between us. "You almost destroyed yourself. You almost threw away Mom's entire legacy for an illusion." "How long?" he asked, his voice thick with shame as he looked at the floor. "How long have you been protecting me from myself, the debts, the company's survival?" "Since Mom died," I answered honestly. "I couldn't watch you sink the ship she built, so I worked from the shadows. I let you keep the title, the glory, the country club stories. I just wanted you to be okay. But I can't do it from the shadows anymore, Dad. You crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed." He nodded slowly, tears spilling hot and fast down his cheeks. "I know. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve any of it. I am so deeply, incredibly sorry, my brilliant girl." It was the first time in my entire life he had called me brilliant. The apology was raw, and I knew it was genuine. The spell Vanessa had cast was broken, leaving only the devastating reality of his own foolishness. "I forgive you, Dad," I said softly, the words feeling true as they left my lips. The anger was gone, replaced by a necessary, firm resolve. but forgiveness does not mean returning to the way things were. In the weeks that followed, the landscape of my life changed dramatically, but entirely on my own terms. Using my professional network and the irrefutable evidence I had gathered, I ensured that Valerie Potts faced a mountain of felony charges. The district attorney pursued her for elder fraud, grand larceny, and perjury. Her assets were frozen, and she was remanded without bail. Her days of preying on vulnerable families permanently ended. As for Mitchell Holdings, the board of directors, having reviewed my full audit, forced Arthur into immediate mandatory retirement. They didn't have to look far for a replacement. As the majority debt holder and the person who had secretly kept the company afloat for a decade, I was unanimously appointed as the new chief executive officer. I finally moved out of my quiet, isolated apartment and took my rightful place in the corner office. I was no longer the silent, fragile daughter hiding in the background. I was the architect of my own life, fiercely protective of my peace and my legacy. Arthur moved into a smaller, manageable condo. We still spoke, carefully rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of hard truths and newly established boundaries. He was a humbled man, finally recognizing the strength I had carried quietly for so long. As I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of my new office, looking out over the city skyline, I took a deep, full breath. My lungs were completely clear. The air tasted crisp and sweet. The trap had been sprung, the truth had prevailed, and for the first time in my life, I was finally, truly free to breathe.